My name is Simone Morris. I'm the CEO of Simone Morris Enterprises, LLC. I've been in business for about 5 years. I come from a corporate background, which started out with information technology and then moved over to human resources, specifically diversity and inclusion. The way that I got into diversity and inclusion was through an employee resource group. I really had no idea that I would fall in love with it. But that's exactly what happened. I started by leading an African Heritage Employee Resource Group, and I led that for about 4 years. And I ended up liking that more than my day job. So I got the opportunity to shift over to HR, and I had the opportunity to help the different groups, the different ERGs. I formed an ERG advisory council and sort of cross-pollinate the ERG so that they can work together to support one another. I did some recruiting, going out with the organization, just did a lot that I really enjoyed. So when the time came for me to go back to my function, I really didn't want to go back to IT. So I ended up exiting corporate America about 5 years ago, and I started my own company, and I've been finding my way. And finally, I'm niched down to something that I'm happy with that embraces my diversity. So I have a passion for career growth and helping to put women in the driver's seat for their careers. So that's one arm of my business. And the other arm of my business is around inclusive leadership. I teach organizations how to walk the talk when it comes to inclusion. So there are lots of organizations trying to diversify the workplace, and I say kudos to that. My passion is really it's really around the talent that you're bringing in. How do you make them feel included, welcomed, like they belong? And the talent that's there, how do you make them feel included, welcomed, belong, so they don't feel like you're changing out the workforce and bringing new people in and that they don't matter? So I am all about teaching these inclusive strategies. I've partnered with companies to be adjunct faculty to teach for them. And now it is my season, and I am looking for the gifts in COVID. And so creating my own program, and you guys are part of this inaugural journey. So happy that you're here today. Who wants to go next? Anyone? Just introduce yourself. It can be quick. You don't, whatever you want to say is fine.
I'll go ahead. My name is Lanta Totten. I own a yoga studio in Northwood, New Hampshire. And I assumed quite foolishly that inclusiveness was just, golly, I'm kind of embarrassed to say I didn't know that it just wasn't as pervasive as I hoped that it was. And I've been shocked into this awakening and wanting to teach people and be a leader in my community on how to be more inclusive, how to be more tolerant, how to seek out the parts of themselves that they don't even know aren't. And it's really important to me. I feel like I've been in this white bubble and I'm a little embarrassed by myself. And I want to do better. So I'm here today to start as a leader and do the work.
Awesome, awesome. Let me just bounce off of something that Lanta just said, and that is, mess up in this space. This is what this is for. If you can't say something in service of learning and we learn together, if you can't say it here, you're definitely not going to say it outside of this environment. So go ahead and say it, and we can try to unpack it and learn from one another. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
I'll go next.
Thank you, Cindy.
Sure, Simone. My name is Cindy Constable. I am the co-founder of Results Global Impact Consulting Agency, which I own with my husband. That's a content marketing agency. And we have a digital arm of that agency, in which we teach entrepreneurs how to get published in large publications like Forbes, Inc., Entrepreneur, places like that, as columnists, not as somebody quoting you in an article, as an actual columnist where you're the expert, where people come to you for your knowledge and expertise. And then we have personal coaching clients that we help with growing their business and doing like lead generation, marketing, that type of stuff. And I also have my own consulting firm for about 6 years, which is a management consulting firm specializing in strategic planning from a DEI perspective. And our goal has been from hire to retire, to ensure that all of your processes, your SOPs, how you work with your staff is in alignment. And my experience up until this most recent time has been a lot of lip service from companies around that. I've been brought in, I've taught a 2-hour workshop, they've checked the box and they've moved on and called it cultural change. And Simone and I both know that's not how cultural change happens. And I didn't specialize in race. I specialized in gender equity specifically. So my TED talk was around the disintegration of the genders. And because women in particular, experience different things in the corporate world, women of color additionally. So that's been what I work on in my strategic planning effort, just kind of dismantling what they do and really ensuring that your goals and objectives as stated as an organization, that the things that you do really back those goals up, versus the goals being nice for your website or your social media posts and they're not being practice of that. And so now I'm excited to loop back around with those clients and say, so are you ready to now actually do the work? And I'm here to learn to make sure that I do that in the best, most inclusive way possible. Because to this point, I felt like we've achieved some diversity, if you will, and that the colors of the faces are different, but that's not equity and that is not inclusion.
Awesome. Welcome, where you have a wealth of expertise that I hope you will lend to strengthening this program, and just, speak up and share your knowledge as well for us to learn from you. So thank you for being here, Cindy.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm an instructor and I'll call on people. So just,
I'll go.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Sarah Lewis. I'm the director of Dress for Success in Mid-Fairfield County. We're a program of the workplace, which is the Southwest Connecticut Regional Workforce Development Board. What you don't read about on the headlines at Dress for Success is that it has a pretty problematic history. So it was created right at the start of the welfare reform movement. And when I took this job, one of the first things I did was some research on the history, and came across this really great article talking about this power dynamic between typically these white volunteers and women of color who were coming in for services. And I have never forgotten that article. I am a heterosexual, cisgendered white woman who is running an organization that serves a very diverse population. And so I think for me, this conversation and this training is important because I need to make space for other voices, and to make sure that the service we're providing is inclusive and doesn't shame people or make people feel bad for who they are, but really lifts their voices up and makes them feel prepared and confident. So I'm really excited. I'm sure I'm going to mess up, but I'm glad to have a safe place to do that in.
Welcome, Sarah. Nice to finally meet you.
Yes, I know.
I've had some of the women in my program, my career workshops from Dress for Success. So nice to finally meet you.
Me too.
All right, who's next?
I'll go next. My name is Zoe Schwartz. I'm the manager of membership services at the Alliance. We are the statewide association of nonprofits. We've got over 300 nonprofit members across the state. I run our training program, so we're always looking for new trainers, and I figured I should educate myself so I can go out and make informed decisions about and be really conscious about the people that we're bringing in to do trainings. And Sarah actually sent this to me, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of just learn more and, like Sarah said, be able to mess up in a safe space. So I'm really, really looking forward to it.
Nice to meet you, Zoe. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Amy Knapp, and I am the VP of People for a tech company called Catalent Technologies in the Boston area. And I joined the company 4 months ago, and it's been a season, to put it lightly. There's just been a ton going on, and the company hasn't had. We're not a very diverse company by any measure, but we'd like to take some steps to change that. But we'd also like to work on inclusion and equity and belonging. And I have been in the HR and talent space for over 20 years, never owning, always weaving diversity and inclusion and belonging into the programs that I'm building on either the TA side or the HR side. But I really want to just learn a lot more about how do I apply it as not a people department initiative, right? And like, how do we influence it across the whole company, and thinking about like and putting it really into our operating system, so to speak, and like really make some really great change and dynamic change at the company. And so I'm here to just grow my expertise and learn from everybody, and just think about like, how do I approach all of our business programs with an inclusive lens, and help influence other people as well.
Awesome. Welcome. Nice to have you, Amy. Brian.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. I'm working on a memoir that's called Man Amongst Women. So thank you for being a part of my journey. I say that half in jest, but it's interesting because as the white guy in the room, I find myself in my various corporate backgrounds, usually engaged very much with communities of women leaders. And my most recent post was head of diversity and inclusion for Ascena Retail Group, which was a conglomerate of women's apparel brands that some of you may know: Ann Taylor, Loft, Blue and Gray, Dress Barn. Sarah, it's great to meet you on the local level, because we had some national connections with Dress for Success, and then 3 of our brands sat in the Columbus, Ohio area, and Dress for Success. The synergies there were huge. So it's exciting. I'm in a job transition. Interestingly enough, kind of echoing what some of you also shared, they brought me in, I spearheaded the strategic roadmap, I lifted up some programs, employee resource groups, executive sponsors, took the sort of metrics all the way to the board of directors on how we were going to drive accountability. And we set those goals that were in the corporate social responsibility report. I know someone mentioned the idea of like, does the outside messaging match the inside? And then when it really came down to it, I mean, the company was definitely struggling financially and in turnaround. And my goal, sort of echoing what you shared, Amy, was to try to figure out how to integrate in a business operations lens to be a part of the turnaround formula, right? Diversity and inclusion done right can help drive the business to success. But basically they realized that they weren't really up for the task, and they were so busy sort of, trying to just hit the basics that I was separated from the company. And somebody said yesterday, which I'll quote, is like the idea of the gift of rejection can be the gift of protection. So, but sort of along the lines of what Simone shared, and everybody's got their core journey. I spent almost 20 years in different brand marketing roles. And when I launched an LGBT resource group at Pepperidge Farm 14 years ago, I found myself doing D&I work on a part-time basis. And then over the course of the last 14 years, have cultivated that first part-time in concert with marketing, and then moved into it full-time 6 years ago. But the thing I've been interested in is always the intersection of talent and marketplace. But again, echoing what you shared, Amy, is that the 4 organizations I've been in doing D&I work full-time have all seen D&I as a people function. And it's hard to compel the leaders to move to that point where it aligns. So, I'm here to sharpen my saw, to build out my toolkit, to support Simone's journey, and to see what we can do as a community of learners together, because, I think we're at a precipice right now where if the work was underappreciated before, it's going to become center stage go forward. So excited to be here with y'all.
Awesome. I'm so excited to have all of you here and to hear your stories. And let's go ahead and jump right in. I love the word you said, Brian, about precipice. I was using, I don't know if I'll say the word right, but cataclysmic. If I had to spell that, at any rate, I feel like the pot is boiled over right now. And I don't want to say ish hit the fan, but I kind of feel like that's what's happened. And so all eyes are on diversity and inclusion. And honestly, the inclusion piece is going to be front and center a lot more than it has been, because it's not just about diversifying the workspace or diversifying areas. It's also about making people feel like they have a seat at the table and they get to talk at the table as well. So let's talk about what you can expect in the program. Confirming that you can see this screen. Can everybody see this screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I've already spoken about who I am. We did introductions. Thank you for filling out the forms to let me know what you are looking to get from the program. We'll continue to weave that in as we learn together. Some of them were a bit detailed, and I always say as an instructor that a lot of the learning comes after the training. So we are going to touch on topics that there is deeper learning for the topic. So we're not going to solve everything in 6 hours, right? And I'm asking you to do some work outside of the training sessions and bring the learning together. But I just want to set expectations up front that we're going in and we're starting the journey. And there is more work to be done. I hope that this will whet your appetite for continual learning, because I think that's one of the core behaviors or the core needs of really building that inclusive leadership muscle. We did our welcome. I'm going to talk to you about the program, what to expect, and then we'll start to just look at some foundation concepts around inclusive leadership and have a QA. The rules of engagement, or how we operate together while we're together, is this is a judgment-free zone. I know it's really, really hard to suspend judgment. We have been trained, and research shows that in the first 7 seconds of meeting someone, we've sized them up and have called on our experiences to, you know, make some judgments about them. So I'm going to ask you to try the best you can to suspend judgment about what's said or how people show up, just in service of learning. I want this to be a learning zone, lots of learning and lots of engagement. I want you to speak up and share your truth and get curious and learn about somebody else's truth. Honestly, every day the headlines change, and I'm using Google a lot more because I don't understand all the things that are happening myself. So I stay in a place of learning, and I expect to learn as much as you will from this program. And I want you to also have some fun while we're together. Anyone want to add anything else? Any rules we want to have while we're together? I have been trained that silence means agreement, so.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so what can you expect from this program? We talked about it a little bit in the introduction. Really, it's a touch point on different topics that make up the inclusive leadership journey. So you can expect that we're going to come together, we're going to review some materials, talk about it, and what I have found from working with mastermind groups that really help is having a space to have conversations outside of our time together. What I have done is I've created a LinkedIn group for us that we can continue to communicate, ask questions, share posts about things that we found, comment, etc. That will be available, and I'll send you the link after this session. So there's a LinkedIn community set up for this Building Your Inclusive Leadership Muscle group, as well as I'm going to ask you to fill out a survey after each module to tell me how it went and what you think should be included or should not be included. Basically, I'm trying to strengthen up this program because it's going to get rolled out on a larger basis after this session. So I want your feedback to make it stronger. So my expectation is that you show up, you participate, you give feedback, and I want you to learn something as well from our time together. I believe that inclusive leadership is a necessity. I spoke about that a bit, but we cannot afford to turn a blind eye to inclusion at this point. We are going to come front and center with it in everything that we do. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So this is the LinkedIn community. I will send you a link to that community. I have set up accountability partners. What I want you to do is to connect. You can connect on LinkedIn, email, however you want to connect. I want you guys to have conversations outside of this setting, just to share in the work. The last slide that I will provide is some items that I want you to do outside of the module. So your accountability partner is there for you to check in with one another, to talk about the homework, if you will. It's light homework, don't think school and get scared, but to have a conversation about it and discuss it so that when we come back together, we can check in and learn from one another with what we have uncovered. So Brian, you and Lanta will connect, Amy, you and Cindy, Zoe, you and Sarah. Okay, and I will put this in the LinkedIn group so that should you forget, it'll be there, as well as it'll also be in the communication that I send out after this program. I believe as a coach that accountability is important, and I believe that it is important for the inclusive leadership journey as well. In terms of the program, there are 6 modules in the program. First, we start with this session, which is really around foundation, about the importance of inclusive leadership. Then we're going to talk next week about some best practices around inclusive leadership. We will then do a deeper dive, if you will, on the topic of recruitment and retention. There's a lot to unpack there, just, you know, enough said about recruitment and retention, but we will talk about how one can be more inclusive in that space. We'll also talk about how you can leverage diverse communities to drive more inclusion. And I'm expecting that you guys might have some things to share in this space, but I will come with the content, as I mentioned before, and then we will build on that content. Then we'll talk about the tech space, because there are lots of technologies that can be leveraged to drive more inclusion. And so we'll bring forward some awareness around that and talk about that a bit more. In Module 6, it's really where we're pulling it all together and talking about how to walk the talk on the inclusion journey. I love talking about this and sort of pulling up the covers and looking at that. What does good inclusive leadership look like? So that is the structure of the program. Any questions?
Nope.
Thank you, Cindy. All right, so here I've already talked about roles and responsibilities, but just so you know, I see my role as delivering content and education, being a resource to support the learning, a facilitator, if you will, answering questions and learning with you. As participants, I see you consuming the content and providing feedback for all the modules. There will be an end of course survey, and I'll ask you to do a testimonial for the program completion. Why do we need inclusion? What do you guys think?
Because we're all different.
Yeah.
It's a really wide range of experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Belief systems, there's all kinds of, like, I've done unconscious bias training, taken and delivered. And when we talk about those differences, I have probably 3 slides with a bunch of little tiny words that go on and on about all of the ways that we can have biasy, you know, against one another. And so it's important to bring everybody in the fold.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And if you have anything that you want to share, please feel free to do that as well, as we set up the different spaces for that. Let me stop the share. I like to see you guys when I'm talking and when I'm sharing that I can't see you. All right, so, okay, let's continue the conversation about just the real need that there is for inclusion. What are other thoughts?
I've read Zoe and I are both in a master's program together, but I read Scott Page's book on the diversity bonus, and I didn't agree with everything that he said, but his main argument was that you get a better outcome when you have more perspectives working on towards a similar goal.
Yep. Yep. Thank you.
Agreed.
Anybody else with thoughts they want to chime in here?
And what I'll add is something that I've been in inquiry about, is the idea that the system that we exist in today is set up in a very patriarchal, white, privilege, power dynamic. And so the idea of inclusion beyond race, ethnicity, or gender is just the idea of like, what is the system wired as, and who needs to be the activator or the engaged, inclusive leader in order to build the awareness to include, right? And then I even saw something last week that has me even more sort of like frozen and curious at the same time, which is this idea that inclusion, the way it's been held, let's say if corporations have been on the journey for 10 plus years out of the 30 plus years that some version of this has been emerging, is that what system are people asking to be included in? In a way, it's included in a white framework or a white power dynamic. So it's inclusion is maybe, if you use that as a start point, but then it's like, from an evolutionary perspective, it's sort of like, what does it really transform to when true inclusion comes to be? But, you know, so, but it's definitely, you mentioned earlier, Simone, the idea of seat at the table, but then the voice at the table, but then it's even to be heard when you're giving voice. So, and then to see the action pull through, right? It's, you know, because there's been so much tokenism and ceremonial stuff. So long way of saying that it's needed, but it's so complex and layered that, you know, it's not an overnight, somebody said check the box thing, you know. It's like
I want to say mic drop, Brian.
Yes.
Whoa. Yeah, you know, because yeah, and bring it. You guys keep bringing it. And what you said that spoke to me is being frozen. There are many people that are frozen because it is so much, and it's like, oh, I can't even, where do I start? Because it seems like a lot of work has been done to date. When I think about companies like Diversity Inc. that does the top 50 companies for diversity and inclusion, and I think about companies, you know, and what's happening and how they're being scrutinized right now. Let's take Starbucks, for example. Starbucks got a lot of kudos for really pivoting from the Philly situation where they had some racial challenges with the manager, quick judgment, bringing the police in, and that just backfired. And Starbucks went, whoop, quickly trained up the staff. And then they were back in the news last week, you know, for you're not in support of Black Lives Matter. People cannot show up in support of Black Lives Matter. Your employees can't show up that way. And so they had to, again, walk the talk and allow employees to shift dress code to support Black Lives Matter. So you can think that you're doing a good job, and very quickly it pivots. And right now, all eyes are on companies to make sure that what they say they're doing, they're actually doing. So companies can't just come out immediately and be like, we support Black Lives Matter. If you haven't cleaned up your house before you came out with that statement, there's a magnifying glass to say, oh, really? What does your board look like? You know, do you have diversity there? What's happening with your retention or your recruitment? And let's show us the data to support and believe that you really truly believe in racial equity and equality, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the need for inclusion has been there for a very long time. However, it's so much work, and there are some companies that are checking the box. I've done D&I training. And I suggest to you that just doing D&I training one-off is not it. Some people go to the training because it's mandatory, and they go and they half listen. I've had angry people in class. They're angry that they are forced to take the training. They do not understand why their company is making them do this. They don't believe it's a good use of time, and their posture and energy is, I do not want to be here, but I'm here. So if those scenarios continue and people are just checking the box and not really believing, then it becomes a greater challenge. So lots of challenges here. We definitely need inclusion, and we can see it. You're going to see a slide that I'm going to put up shortly, just with all the different things that are going on that are screaming, include us.
I agree. And there's so many marginalizations, you know, Black Lives Matter being front and center. It's also, you know, it's Pride Month, which has been a challenge. I mean, we just had some Supreme Court decisions to uphold. So if we were truly like an inclusive nation, we wouldn't even need to be bringing these things to the Supreme Court. And then just with all of the different dimensions of diversity, you know, race being one that you can kind of see, you know, there are age, you know, communication style, your educational background, you know, depending on what sector of the workforce you're in, you can be discriminated for having a degree, not having a degree, your accent. Oftentimes, if you speak English with an accent, people think you are not smart. You know, your marital status, who you're married to, in fact, you know, is an issue. Parental status, you know, you may have hiring challenges if someone is assumed to be a single mom with small kids, they don't want to hire. A physical ability, geographic location. We've learned through COVID that geographic location shouldn't be a barrier for working at a company. Everybody's remote and now, you know, knows that you can do it. Physical appearance, you know, whether you're slim, attractive, political beliefs. Big thing we've seen in the divide. So there's so many dimensions of diversity, you know, religion, spiritual practice, sexual orientation, that, you know, for a company to really say, like, I'm inclusive, there's a lot of metrics and KPIs that you can look to see where do you fall on these spectrums. You know, what does your health insurance look like? Who are you covering? Who are you not covering? Like, where are you willing to put your dollars? So there's just so many ways that you can fall down as an organization. And, you know, when you're beating your chest on your website about how great you are, like, I'm with you. Let's pull back that curtain and see how great is it really.
Such great build, Cindy. And what comes up for me is that I think that people don't expect you to get it right, but to be vulnerable, to say, this is what we're doing on the journey. And sometimes what happens is that you've got a chief diversity officer, if you're lucky, a couple other people that are working with them to do what we've just talked about. And there's not enough dollars, resources put against the agenda. So it's slow going in terms of what can happen. And I think that is a challenge. And so when a company finds $1 billion to donate to racial equality, but you can't find it for the staff, you know, it's just sending messages, you're reacting. And so there's an opportunity to be proactive and to be vulnerable, to say, look, we don't have this figured out. We are learning. Here's what we're committed to doing, whether it's the CEO Action Committee, being a part of that. Here's our agenda. And guess what? We're not going to get it right, but we're going to course correct along the way. But we are committed to doing that. And I think that is a big part of it. People want to save face. Some of it is, I want to show people that my company is doing it well and I'm on this top 50 list, even though I've got skeletons in the closet and I'm not fessing up to those skeletons. So there is a lot of work to be done. I don't think I need to convince anybody on this call that we need inclusion. we talked about this a bit. I heard it in the language that you were using, Brian and Cindy. Racism, you know, why do we need inclusion? Racism, sexism, ageism, physical abilities is a huge one, sexual orientation. When you were talking, Cindy, what was coming up for me, I said to my hubby-to-be the other day, I said, you know what, it's Pride Month, and it feels like when Farrah Fawcett died the same time as Michael Jackson, and she got forgotten. And let me come on. Do you know what I mean? Because it's Pride Month, and you know, it's a big deal that it's Pride Month. I am big on these different cultural celebrations and just learning more about different cultures. And I feel like between COVID and what's happened with Black Lives Matter, it's a backdrop, even though there's much going on. I am pleased to see that organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, they've come together. So the fights are working together. And so, but that's what I thought of. It's like, oh my goodness, it's getting overshadowed. And I wonder, Brian, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily share this. I said I was a part of an LGBT resource group, but I identify as a gay man. And, you know, I feel a little bit sad on a personal level. I understand just like inclusive leadership work requires us to center the voices that are not being heard. But I also see a lot of spaces where, you know, again, because of COVID, we're not celebrating in public ways. And so that feels very different. But at the same time, this intersectionality about the Black Lives Matter movement relative to LGBT, because the one thing about LGBTQ is that it can encompass all the different dimensions of diversity and inclusion. And there's Black trans women that are really, you know, one of the very, you know, disproportionately impacted, marginalized groups. And so I see the negative in the sense of the spirit of Pride and celebrating the progress we've made, especially with the recent Supreme Court. But it kind of feels like a little, you know, it's a little blip of history, the Farrah Fawcett analogy.
Yep.
And yet at the same time, we're centering the intersection and the importance of it all. So I see value in that as well. And, you know, even just like you see how curated, you know, Netflix is putting, you know, programming that's centering the intersection of the stories of Black lives and LGBT lives, you know, so it can be powerful. I mean, I feel like, you know, it's kind of a sidebar, but it's like, if anybody's listening, the world is a lesson in diversity and inclusion. Any radio station, any news broadcast, any social media channel, it's like, it's there for textural consumption around why we aren't all one thing. And yet it's funny to see how people, you know, want to identify to a certain, you know, group and not see themselves as somehow connected to the other groups. Back to your point about vulnerability, I mean, you know, can we get down to our core humanness in this? So anyway, but thank you for giving me that moment. It's like, yeah, I feel like Pride isn't really happening, even though I have like virtual cabaret on my calendar, and then I'm doing something about Black Lives Matter and I'm skipping the cabaret, you know, so.
Yeah, and I know Brian, so I just blurted that out, and so I apologize if you know.
No, I can't, you know, again, I don't want to suck all the air out of the room. I got lots of ideas.
Okay. All right. I told you the time is going fast, so let's keep it moving. But this is what I want to share in this conversation for everybody to bring their truth and help us to deeper understand some of the things that are actually happening. So I'm not even going to go there with politics, but that is a huge, you know, mic drop in what's going on with diversity and inclusion right now. And there is lots more going on. I'm going to give you this as an assignment in terms of what are some of the challenges that you see in today's landscape. We briefly talked about that, but I'm going to pose that as a question in the LinkedIn group and have you chime in there as well. So I shared all that to say that most of us are tired. We are exhausted about this diversity and inclusion journey. And again, my message to you is that we are all going to falter at inclusion. The key is to forgive ourselves and to do better the next chance we get. So keep that in your mind. You do not have to show up perfectly in every conversation, because inevitably you encounter unconscious bias and you may treat someone in a way that you didn't intend to. And once you get that feedback, you can course correct, or you may even become self-aware, build that muscle, and correct it yourself. In terms of inclusive behaviors, here's what I came up with, but I would be curious to know if there are other things that you think are a requirement or are important behaviors from an inclusive leadership standpoint. So I came up with curiosity. I heard Brian say that in the beginning. You have to get curious about things that you don't understand. When you shut down from being curious, that's when you're challenged with being open to bringing someone in, including them, welcoming them. So get curious. If you don't understand something, ask. You know, I just asked Brian a question because I wanted to know. I sent my friend Eric a note and said, hey, how are you celebrating Pride Month? Because I didn't want to forget about it and I wanted to ask him. Get curious. Be self-aware. If you messed up, you know, forgive yourself. Give yourself grace that you messed up. Okay, we're not perfect. Everyone is not perfect. So, but be aware of how you are showing up, how you are treating others. That's very important. Also, listen. There's a lot going on right now about this time where people are being asked to just listen. Just listen. Let my voice be heard. Listen before you comment. Just listen. And I think there's an element of being willing to unlearn. I know that my mom taught me some things that aren't true, but it seemed like it was true because of how it was taught to me. And I'm having to unlearn some things to be inclusive. So accept that you are going to be learning some things. There are new things happening, you know, the white privilege, white fragility. I myself am learning about that as well. But recognize that not only are you going to have to stay in a space of learning, but you're going to do some work around unlearning things that you perhaps thought to be true. Walk the talk. This is vital. So walk in integrity. And not only are companies being asked to do that, but individuals are being asked to walk in integrity. Walk the talk when it comes to being inclusive. You can demonstrate championship advocacy behaviors where you're an ally and supporter for different causes. Lend your access or you know, the opportunities that you have, lend it to uplift others. And also you have to be a risk taker because you may be scared about what you're about to do. I had someone write to me to say they were afraid to have a conversation with their family. And they didn't know what to say because they brought up Black Lives Matter and all the family member could talk about was the looting. And they didn't feel educated to continue the conversation, so they just shut down. How do I show up and continue the conversation? And so an element of it is being brave, because not everybody is going to be open to creating a more inclusive scenario. And I say that because look at NASCAR. The guy driving the car, Bubba, I forget his last name right now, but now there are nooses in his garage because he took a stand. Colin Kaepernick took a stand and he lost his livelihood, etc. So there is something at stake for us all. You know, when I think about speaking up for myself, I think there are probably companies that won't work with me because of how vocal I'm being. And I just have to accept that, because for me, it's more important to push for visibility, to educate, et cetera, et cetera. And you may come up against that in your company, in your personal life, et cetera, where you're being asked to show up in a different way. And also, not speaking is speaking. I want you to remember that. You not speaking is sharing a message, and you want to get ahead of that narrative and change the narrative. So even if you're scared, you have to be courageous in this inclusive leadership journey. What other behaviors?
I have a lot going on in my head right now, Simone, I'll be honest. And I was getting emotional when you were talking. I'm not really sure why, but you know, my comment is, and I was thinking this at the very beginning of your presentation, is that I'm so exhausted by the lip service that I see all these companies giving. Like every time I go on a website to go shopping, there's a statement, and I'm happy there's a statement, but I'm also like pretty sure that no action is following up behind that statement. And that makes me really angry. But I'm also, you know, when I was looking at your list, I thought about the word challenge, because I feel like as, you know, people who care about this topic, but also professionally want to grow in this area, I feel like it's my responsibility to challenge other people when I see something going on. And, you know, I think why I'm getting emotional is because, you know, I work with a lot of volunteers, most of whom have various forms of privilege. And then we're working with, you know, a lot of the times very, very poor women. And there's this lack of understanding that I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle because, you know, we have these they're volunteering their time, but they're also doing microaggressions against these women who are struggling. Maybe they smell bad. They're living in a homeless shelter. They're late. They didn't have childcare. And so it's like, I feel like what's going through my head right now is I just have a lot of work to do with our volunteer base around empathy and understanding. And, you know, it's not as much about race as socioeconomics. But, you know, for me, I'm embarrassed sometimes to have a client work with anyone but me because of the way our volunteers perceive different things about people. So that was a word vomit, and I'm sorry, but, you know, it's just, I just, through this whole thing, I've been thinking about that, and it's just, it's very overwhelming, but, you know, it needs to be done. And, you know, if no one says something to them, that's on me. That's my job.
Mm-hmm.
So Sarah, I was actually going to say kind of the same thing, because I think one of my biggest takeaways from the Black Lives Matter movement is being a defender and kind of stepping up and making sure that your voice is heard. So if you overhear someone saying something, like I was at the hair salon a couple weeks ago, like right when it opened, and there was a woman who was just, it's always the loudest person in the room, I feel like, just screaming about all lives matter and how it just like makes me really upset. And so I went over to her and I said something, and I was like, you know, that's not what it's about. It's not, we're standing up for the people who need our help right now, and that's what it's about. It's not saying that, you know, other groups don't matter, but we're standing up for the people who need our help. And like, she like just went off on me, and it was really, really scary. And it was probably it was just terrifying, but I felt that I had to do it, because if we don't stand up and say something to those people, they're going to continue to do it. And I just think, Sarah, like building off of what you said, it is embarrassing to hear your friends or your family say things like that, or people that you work with. And I think it's not enough for us to just to internalize it and to make sure that we're working on ourselves. I think it's, as a white woman especially, I think we have to use our privilege to kind of speak up and to use that platform to kind of educate everyone else around us, even if it means, you know, burning bridges or being uncomfortable or being afraid.
I think that's one of the reasons. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Zoe. Go ahead. No, Lana, sorry about that.
It's okay.
Go ahead, Lana.
I was going to say that, how do I word it? The idea of privilege has definitely been something that I've been looking at. You know, I live in rural New Hampshire. I teach at a yoga studio that's predominantly white. I think we might have one person of color in my whole town. So it's easy to fall into a belief system that you don't have any racism in you. And furthermore, anyways, I'll step away from that. I'm trying to figure out how to have those conversations that I keep coming up against people who don't want to hear. Like in that situation, good on you that you spoke to that woman, but she didn't change her mind. And I want to know how to educate myself enough to be able to speak in a way that allows change to happen. I think that I am 100% behind making sure change happens in corporations and how I spend my money and all the things. I'm really trying hard to take a look at where my power is there in my privilege. But the next step is, what do we do with a straight out person who doesn't want inclusivity? How do we diminish that voice and raise up this other voice? I keep coming up at dinner table conversations and being that horrible guest who says all the things, but they don't want to hear. And I'm so frustrated, and I don't know how to affect change in others. I can bring up change in myself, and God help me, I have 3 sons, and I'm bringing up, oh, now I'm getting emotional. I'm so sick of hearing about white tears, because I swear to you, I'm not that person. I want better, and I don't know how to make better.
Well, I feel privileged that, I'm one of those people who come with like 60 pages. So I have stopped with the deck because I realize the privilege of what's happening here. And that you trust me, you trust everyone in this space to show up vulnerably, and share your truth. So that touches my heart deeply. The first response I have is, you are not going to change people overnight. There are people that are diversity and inclusion practitioners who have been trying to convince people in organizations, outside of organizations, to change. It does not happen overnight. So I think the expectation that you're going to walk up to someone and they're going to be like, you know what, you're right. What was I saying?
You're like, don't you see my big heart bleeding all over the place? Can't you feel what I'm saying? You should just change your mind. And instead I get the most horrific conversations that I'm like, my God, I'm surrounded by the biggest group of bigots and misogynists. I jaw drop, back to square one.
Yeah. And so this is a journey.
Mm.
I'm reminded of something Jennifer Brown, who's also an inclusion strategist, said a couple weeks ago. We did a racial panel, and we're doing one on Thursday. I'll drop the link in the message to you if you'd like to attend. But she said to call people in instead of calling them out. And it has stayed with me, because believe me, I did a Disrupt HR on calling HR out, because I was just so frustrated, and my title was called I Call BS. And I think I may have said this to you, Brian, or I'm calling BS on people with the lip service that are in HR and not truly inclusive, in leadership and not truly inclusive. So I had to tame myself down. And I took what she said and tried to think about how I can rephrase my language to deliver it in a loving way instead of a stop in your face way. So and it's not going to happen overnight, because there are triggers that are going to set me off. And know that everybody is emotionally raw right now based on what's happening. I am emotionally raw. If I see one more article about somebody getting killed where I'm just like, I haven't even processed what's already happened, and here's more information to deal with. So number one, give yourself grace. Give yourself kudos that you are now self-aware that it bothered you, and that you were willing to be courageous and say something. You don't have to convert the other person. You're doing the change in yourself to start with. So kudos to you for that. And again, kudos for the self-awareness that I'm seeing something, and Kelly Charles talks about bystander intervention. I'm doing something, I'm seeing something that's wrong, and I'm doing something. I'm not remaining silent, because my silence means that I'm okay with it, and I'm not actually okay with it. So there is much work to be done. It's a journey, and baby step, baby step, baby step. And you know what? There will be a point where you'll go up to someone and you'll say something, and there'll be a light that goes off, and you'll be like, I can't even believe that a light went off with this person. So know that it's a journey.
And I agree. I would add, you know, there's a lot of anger from the Black community. So I think part of the challenge is you're seeing some of us in the Black community saying, don't ask me questions, don't come to me now with your crap and your tears. Because the exasperation you're feeling with trying to talk to someone a couple of times, they've been feeling that for a lifetime. And so, you know, I'm probably on the other side of the fence saying, you know, as people of color, yes, we're frustrated. Yes, we've gone through, you know, hundreds of years of repression, but when someone is trying, if I slap their hand down, that doesn't get us further. When the oppressed becomes the oppressor, we don't really get there. But all of that is a lot of personal development work. So if anybody's in the personal development space or has done personal development, like I know that, you know, I don't get offended, I take offense. There's a difference. And that's, you know, someone who is newly awakened to an idea. If our goal was to awaken someone to their prejudice, their bigotry, their racism, whatever ism or whatever phobia they had, and they awaken to it, we have to meet them where they're at. And I also understand, you know, as I'm biracial, so, you know, my experience is different than Simone's. She presents like a Black woman. I present like a Hispanic woman, but I'm half Black. So it's interesting how the presentation, our outward presentation, makes a difference on how we're treated. But that whole frustration for some has been a lifetime. For others, it's new. And we're like, welcome to the fight. Here we are. But understanding you're going to get different perspectives, even from within the Black community, even from people of color. There's colorism within the Black community. I mean, so the Black community has its own issues to deal with. And so for white people, or, yes, or for non-melanated folks or less melanated folks, they may not be willing to confront their own isms or phobias. Because a lot of times admitting that you are the problem or you're part of the problem is the first and biggest hurdle. Because, you know, like for instance, a great example, my son-in-law is a, you know, heteronormative white male. You know, he's an athlete, he's beautiful, he's, you know, like, so his walk through life as a professional baseball player has been, you know, fairly innocuous, no issue. So he really couldn't understand like, what do you mean? Oh, should I feel bad that I was born as a white guy? Oh, excuse me. You know, like he wasn't ready to confront that not actively being a racist doesn't make you anti-racist. And so he lives in my home, eats my food, and will not acknowledge racism and anti-racism are not the same thing. He's married to my brown daughter and has my little baby. So even when you look, because he's like, what, guess what, I got Black friends, you know, so it's really hard for some folks to come to that realization that even if you as a person have not been racist, you're loving, you're caring, you have benefited from an institutionalized racist system. And that's where we talk about the helping of the dismantling, because it's not that you're behaving like a racist, being racist towards others. It's that just by virtue of the fact of how the system is created, that as a white person, you even have the ability to say that it doesn't happen. like I can't ever say that because it has happened to me. And my son-in-law can say that because it hasn't happened to him. He doesn't see the system as broken because what's the problem? He's never had a problem. So it's just, you know, some of that is just their own demon. And until you can get to where you're willing to look in the mirror and say, okay, and then the uncomfortability. Yes, you being a champion means people are going to look at you some kind of way. They're going to say stuff to you. And that's a different hurdle. you acknowledging maybe there's a problem, but then you then doing something about that problem, and your like best buddy from college now doesn't want to talk to you. Oh, like that's like, I don't know if I'm willing to, take that step. So but for me, as a person of color, I am happy for all those on the journey, and whatever various ways they're on the journey. I equate anti-racism to Christianity, if you will, and I'll explain why. Because people who don't believe in religion or Christianity will say, well, look how they act. And because of how they act, that's not, I don't want to do that. Well, if I'm saying join my anti-racist movement and you start to ask me questions and I slap you down, or I'm coming at you with my anger, then you don't want to join my movement because you're saying, oh, well, that's ugly. And so I'm trying not to be ugly. And sometimes I've had to say, I don't have the mental capacity to answer your questions right now about how I feel about that boundary. And I'll circle back and say, okay, I'm ready now. Like you said, Simone, like this is in the news, that happened. And you're trying to process one thing and then something else happens and somebody says some crap to you and you're like, so, but I think the space of willingness is everything. So I don't see your tears as white fragility. There are those who may. I see your tears as a point of compassion. And the brown girl in me thanks you for that you have compassion and you're willing to say, I don't know what to do, but I want to. And I'm like, well, let's go link up. Let's have at it. Let's go figure it out together, because I've had to study like Simone. Like, I don't know all the facts and all the things about all of the racist things. I've had to study and say, because I've grown up in a white society. So I have to learn, where have I absorbed that into my own life? Where have I shrunk? What do I have to do different? And how do I not take it out on a white person? How do I not present that anger and instead present compassion for something someone may have literally just been unaware of, and not maliciously so?
Well, this is deep stuff. I cannot believe maybe I need to make this 90 minutes. All right. It's awesome. I love what's happening here, because honestly, no matter what I write down, we're learning from what's happening here. This is learning as well. So I thank you for showing up and for sharing. If you have 2 more minutes where I can jump to my last slide just to tell you what to expect next, I'll do that and let you go. But I will come with less content next week to allow for these conversations, because I think it's an important part of the learning as well. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. All right, so in terms of next steps, and I'll weave in some of the stuff that we glossed over in the next presentation. What I want you to do next is to join the LinkedIn group, and let's continue some of these conversations there. I'll pose some of the questions from the presentation in the LinkedIn group. I'm going to send you a link to a survey. You tell me what we need to modify in Module 1, and I'll take that feedback to heart. In terms of understanding the inclusive landscape, what are the terms that are important for you to understand? I want you to tell me that so that I can have that in my mind as well and weave it in. With your accountability groups, I want you to identify 3 to 5 companies that you think are doing it right in terms of inclusive leadership, and 3 to 5 companies that you think need some help. And now I want you to personalize it. What action do you plan to take this week to build your inclusive leadership muscles? What are you going to do differently this week? And so I want you to connect with your partner and have a conversation. You can do some work before, but also connect with them between now and the next time that we meet and discuss the things that I asked for. You don't have to worry about writing this all down. I'm going to send you an email with everything that was on that last slide that I'm asking you to do. But be thinking about what we talked about and how we were able to just hold space to learn together. And this is what I want to keep doing, hold space, because we are going to be building the muscle by holding this space. I thank you for being a part of this journey. This was fabulous. You made my day, and I'm so excited to spend the next 6 weeks with you. Do you have any questions before I let you go?
Nope. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Looking forward to
everybody.
learning.
Yes. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye,
You
everybody.
too.
Bye, everybody. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.